Thank you for joining us for the Secure Connections podcast, brought to you by IoTSSA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. I'm Brian Sherman, host of the series and content director for Get Channeled and IoTSSA. October is Cybersecurity Month, and we've added a host of new content to celebrate, including today's podcast with CompTIA's Senior Director of Technology Analysis, Seth Robinson. CompTIA is the official research partner for IoTSSA, and their team has created a variety of content, including a special IoT and cybersecurity presentation to help at our live events. In today's podcast, Seth will share key details from their recently released 2018 Trends in Cybersecurity report on building effective security teams. That is a mouthful, but Seth, welcome to the Secure Connections podcast.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, we've known each other for a long time and have been involved in the technology industry, so it's always nice when we can bring familiar faces on, or familiar voices in this case. Let's start out with a big one. How big a factor is cybersecurity in the future of MSP businesses?
Well, I guess I would say, just thinking about the future of cybersecurity and the IT landscape, what I think we're seeing, what we've seen for the past few years, is that cybersecurity has typically been a part of what people do with their infrastructure. And I think a lot of MSPs have probably treated it that way as well. If they're doing networks, if they're running servers, whatever they're doing, security is probably kind of part and parcel of that. What we've seen in the enterprise and has been reflected in solution providers is the beginning of a move to security as a standalone discipline. So in an enterprise, that might be naming a CISO and creating a security team under that person. In the channel world, it could be the move from an MSP into a managed security solution provider, really specializing in security. And so I think that there is this notion of security becoming its own focused discipline, partly because security is becoming much more complex. And, we can talk about some of the reasons why it's becoming more complex, and partly because it's becoming so much more critical to business operations that if business operations are becoming more and more digital, then obviously any kind of security breach or data loss or incident like that is going to disrupt those operations in a more significant way. And so those two things combined, I think, are making companies look at security more directly, and that creates more of an opportunity for a managed service provider or some other type of third-party firm to focus on security and bring in some specialized skills or some specialized expertise around even one specific area of security.
Makes sense. Now, I know CompTIA has done a tremendous amount of research over the years and continues to do so. Let's dig into the latest cybersecurity study that we mentioned previously. What are some of the key findings from this report, and how will they affect the SMB?
So the motivation behind this report really was to start thinking about, if security is becoming its own discipline, are companies beginning to form teams around this? And how are they forming those teams? And so we really wanted to dig into that a little bit and just get some basics around what's happening there. I would say probably at this point, you don't have the vast majority of companies that are viewing it as, we have a security team of people. These are the people that are doing this function. But I think they're starting to think about it that way. And I think we'll see more progress over the next few years. A lot of companies today, if they're thinking about a secure center of operations, they view the leadership on that as coming from the inside. And I think that makes sense. If security is being tied more to business success and business operations, you probably want someone on the inside that's kind of got their finger on the pulse of that critical piece. But with that said, especially in the SMB space, with security being so much more complex, obviously, a lot of companies can't just staff up the resources to tackle every angle of security. And so they might have this internal resource that's focused on it and kind of driving the strategy and driving some of the tactics, but they don't have a full team behind that person. And so that person then is coordinating any internal resources that there may be, as well as external resources. And so especially in the SMB space, there's probably a little bit more exploration of partnering. And this could be looking to a current partner and having more discussions with them on security, or using a current partner for one piece of security and then reaching out to someone that might be more specialized in another area and beginning to form more of a partner network. Obviously, for the SMB, budget becomes a concern, whether they're trying to bring people in-house or whether they're trying to create, a partner network. But we do think that the budget for security is probably something that's going to end up growing over the next few years as it relates to the overall budget. So like the percent of overall budget that a company may be spending on security is probably going to have to grow because it's so critical in nature. And so as it grows a little bit, I think companies are going to be exploring, what do we do? How do we mix our resources and create this team of professionals that's making sure that we stay secure?
It's an interesting transition. I know before I got in the IT field, looking back 17 years, I worked for a Fortune 500 company, which was in the medical pharmaceutical side. And, a lot of the things we used back then is the tokens, two-factor authentication. They were very intentional about security because they had to be. We're still in the earlier days of PCs and stuff. It's interesting to see the transition over the 17 years I've been in the channel of how that is slowly getting pushed down, and the MSPs and other solution providers are kind of taking over those responsibilities, like the IT team did for my company back in the days. It's it seems like it's fast, but in the same respect, we're talking over 2 decades of computer development that it's becoming much more intentional, and planning is more of a part than being reactive with security. So let's talk a little about the talent challenges for small and mid-sized companies. And I think the study also looked at enterprise companies as too. Where are the skilled security specialists going?
I'm not sure, where all they're going. I mean, they're going wherever, people want them, and people, want them in lots of different places. I think that, the demand for security skills is pretty healthy. And when we're talking about skill demand out there, I think you always have to kind of put it in relative terms. And so you might look at a really hot job, an emerging technology like artificial intelligence or IoT or blockchain or something like that, and you can see a lot of growth in that field, but that growth is coming off of a small base. On the other end of the spectrum, you might look at something that's not growing real rapidly, like server administration or help desk or whatever, but because the base is so large, the raw numbers there of growth or demand is pretty significant. And we present security in this new report as something that's kind of sitting in the middle of those two things, something that has to bridge the world between really traditional IT and a lot of emerging technology, because companies are changing their IT approach as they adopt these new things. And those changes drive new security vulnerabilities and new things that have to be patched up. And so I think that there is some healthy, growth around demand for security, and it's already on top of a decent sized base. And so I think that we will see continued demand for security, especially as it becomes more and more critical, and companies continue to recognize that maybe they've extended their technology footprint, but now they need to play catch up with security. And I think even looking at the types of skills that companies are looking for really highlights this fact that security is sitting in two worlds. You've got a lot of prerequisite knowledge that companies say they need, like server administration or networking or endpoint devices. And then there are obviously new fields like security analytics or penetration testing. And we can see relatively large number of companies, like, a quarter to a third of companies saying that they want to see significant improvement in almost any area that you would choose. And I think in the more traditional areas, that would be because they know those areas well, and they know exactly which skills they need to improve and which holes they need to fill. And in the emerging areas like penetration testing, they don't know a lot about it, but they just know that they need it. They know that it's a raw need that they have coming in. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity here for people that have been doing IT for a long time to maybe transition a little bit more into security if they're coming from that infrastructure piece, and maybe specialize more in some of the basics around security. And then for like new people or a firm that might be trying to transition into being completely about security, there's opportunity here to add some of these skills like security analytics or penetration testing that I've mentioned, that are bringing some new facets into the picture.
So is that an educational opportunity, I should say a business opportunity for IT service providers? You mentioned that a lot of companies don't know exactly what they need when it comes to security, of them to assess, evaluate, propose, and manage all those various aspects of that moving target we call security.
I think so. You talked before about kind of this shift from being purely defensive into a little bit more of a proactive approach. And I think we still see a lot of companies just beginning to figure that out. And so you've got this educational opportunity around what modern security looks like, that it is a lot more proactive, and it's not just about the technology anymore. It's about processes like risk analysis or compliance management. And then it's also about the education of the workforce. And those last two things, processes and workforce education, are pieces that companies have not traditionally been doing. And so even if a given solution provider doesn't have an educational play on their own, I think to come in and be able to kind of drive the security conversation around really high level, what are the basics that you need to understand? You need to be more proactive. You need to be thinking about process. You need to be thinking about education. That will probably open up a lot of different discussions. And if the solution provider has some plays for those, then that's a good thing. If the client is open to creating a network of security professionals, then the solution provider that leads that conversation might get a chance to be the head on the horse for the overall security effort, even if some other firms are coming into the picture.
That makes sense. I know I was talking last week with the head of a cybersecurity specialist firm. I guess you'd call them a master MSSP. We like to use a lot of acronyms, I know, in the industry. But he said the toughest thing for him is not finding the security talent, because he knows if he finds it, he has to pay for it. But the bigger problem seems to be finding that mix of skills of not just the technology, but the ability to storytell, to go into accounts and to be able to let them know, here's the issues that could happen in that progression. We sometimes think about that in the tech industry. I know, over the channel is the strength of many channel professionals has been their tech side, but in security, they really need to build out that communication side and the business side of the aspect. Is that an area where I didn't see that part in the survey, but are you starting to see where that's a bigger need too for some of the companies?
I think we've talked about that quite a bit before in some of our other reports, just talking about technology in general. Yeah. That as technology has become more strategic, so if you go to like a white paper that I wrote this year about strategic technology and how you can build competitive advantage with that, there's a lot of that sort of storytelling in there. There's a lot of that connection to the business, very direct connection, that didn't used to be there before. When IT was running in a more tactical mindset, they were basically building the systems that kind of enabled the business and served as the foundation. Now that they're taking a more strategic role, they really have to understand where the business is going and how to help get them there. And that's a different conversation. And the line may be kind of fine between the two things, but it's definitely there. And when we look inside a lot of companies at what they're doing with their IT, this is what we see happening with digital transformation, that companies are not just bringing in new tools, and that's the digital part of it, but they're really having to transform their organization and their approach. And then obviously, whatever we see happening with an internal IT function is extending into the third-party world, the business of technology. If that extends beyond the traditional channel, where the channel may have served as more of a distribution function eventually, kind of evolving into managed services. And now you've got this strategic piece, you've got so much more complexity in the landscape, and security obviously plays a huge part in that. That strategic part of security is ensuring that the business remains safe for operations, but also for reputation.
That makes perfect sense. So this report, as well as others, have pointed out and emphasized, I think, the limited talent pool, especially with cybersecurity, is many IT service providers they're not on an island. They're competing with enterprise companies and others for that talent today that they may not have been in other areas. Um, what's the best strategy for MSPs and MSPs to compete in those other markets to get the best talent?
I think that for MSPs, they want to follow the same approach that we're suggesting to a lot of businesses that are competing for talent, which is don't assume that you're going to get this fully baked, perfect security expert just coming out of college or coming out of any walk of life. You are probably going to have to do some amount of training. You're going to have to be thinking about, how can I get a person, even if I get someone that's really close to an ideal candidate, this field is always evolving. And so there has to be some notion of ongoing training, of ongoing skill building. This is a tricky topic within the technology world because companies, whether it's on the MSP side or the end user side, they're always kind of worried about, if I train someone, then if they leave, then I will have lost, that all of the investment that I put into that person. But I think if you build a culture of training, and if you are seen as a place that people want to be because they can get that ongoing skill building, that's what begins to attract the talent. And having that as part of your DNA, I think, is another part of this digital transformation, and recognizing that it's not just building the A team and then going out and conquering the world. It's always learning and always changing and always growing, and having the mechanics within the organization that allow employees to do that, whatever way that might be, whether that's offering in-house training, whether that's offering some time off to attend boot camps or whatever it might be, but something that enables employees to build their skills and grow their careers, even if that leads to some amount of turnover. That's probably making you an attractive place to work.
That makes perfect sense, because I know that the training aspect and building a good team is a mentality too for a lot of employers. Trying to remember who it was that had given the analogy of the New England Patriots. As a Bills fan, I hate using New England Patriots as a success story. I have to throw that out. But if you think about it, is they've built a culture of winning and putting the right people in the right place, and they continually call. They may lose key players each year, but they don't miss a beat because they train others to fill that role. That's kind of the similar role that many MSPs find themselves in. You can't worry about what you might lose. You just have to continually keep building and training and finding the right, I guess it's the right formula of employees that you're hiring and training.
Right. Yeah. It's the world has changed here, and things are more dynamic. We've got more remote work. There's a lot of opportunity there to think about the workforce in different ways. But that comes with challenges. Then you have to actively think about it. You have to put these plans in place. You can't just kind of add on a new coat of paint to the culture that you had before. I think that's one thing that we're seeing a lot with digital transformation. And then security plays into that, is that a lot of this is cultural, and it might come from the top down. It might kind of come from somewhere else within, but cultures are having to change if companies are wanting to be on the cutting edge with their use of technology or the skills they have or whatever it might be.
Now, Seth, did this report look at collaboration with peers as well? Because I know that's one of the areas that, or at least some of the other reports that you've dealt with, is in the security space. That seems like a big opportunity area.
You're talking about like peer-to-peer collaboration within the partner space?
Right. Or bringing in other specialists for like penetration testing, for example, and security insurance specialists and others that kind of know their role and can fill the gaps that MSPs may have.
I mean, I think the data that we collected really set the stage for that, as a lot of the data that we collect tends to do. We didn't look specifically at what our company is doing here. This report in particular was focused on end users. And so we've got a little bit of data that shows that end users are beginning to use a network of providers for their security needs. And so there's a suggestion there that they're not just going to a single person and expecting them to do all of their security or all of their IT, but they're open to bringing in specialists. And I think, kind of as you're alluding to, there's the mechanics of that. Then exactly, how does that work? Is the budget really there for that? And then who's managing that? Is the person managing that someone on the end user side, or do they have kind of their primary solution provider that they use that's almost acting like a virtual CIO or a virtual IT department, and then that person is doing like some subcontracting? I think both of those things are happening out there. This report didn't look specifically at how that might be taking place, but definitely for security, there's the appetite, I would say, for multiple firms to play a part of being that security team.
So you mentioned end user businesses. What metrics are they using to measure their cybersecurity performance?
Yeah, the metrics, I think, are a key part of making this more of a business discussion, like we talked about earlier, of having that storytelling or being able to connect the technology to the business. If you think about the way security has typically been treated, I think the primary metric has something bad happened or not? Did we get breached? If not, everything must be working as it needs to. And in large part, that was probably okay, with the amount of attacks that we had at the time, with the amount of interconnectedness that we had at the time. That probably wasn't the worst assumption in the world. Today, that probably wouldn't be the best assumption. There can be attacks that live on networks for a long time, collecting data and doing a lot of damage, or getting into a position where they're going to do a lot of damage. And so it's not really sufficient to just say, well, if we don't notice anything happening, then everything must be okay. There have to be these proactive measures, like we've talked about with penetration testing or external audits or whatever. And then there have to be metrics around that, like what % of network traffic have we found anomalous behavior on? What % of the workforce has gone through training? What % of systems have been upgraded to the latest operating system so that we're making sure to capture all the patches and all of that stuff? There are a lot of different metrics out there. I don't think they are heavily used today. But as security becomes more of a business metric and a business operational need, then the metrics will have to be there. And companies are going to be thinking about the metrics and ROI calculations and things like that a little bit differently. So again, another place that an MSP could really take the lead on this is by discovering metrics that could maybe generically be used across clients, or maybe some metrics that are specific to clients, depending on their vertical or the type of work that they're doing, that could help them understand if the investment is making sense or not, or if the work is actually having some kind of an effect. And that's probably going to be kind of a back and forth discussion with the business to figure out which metrics are they, which ones do we want to track, how do we want to communicate this through the organization. Does this need to be seen at the executive level, or even a board level, or just a business unit level? Where do these metrics need to be tracked and communicated? I think that's a great part of that opening conversation when you're talking about educating on security and trying to move into a spot where you're doing more modern security.
That makes sense. And I know CompTIA has a couple of tools. We did a podcast recently with the IT security community, and they even brought to front the cybersecurity wizard that community had created to help, help MSPs to assess their clients, look at some of the different vulnerabilities that they may have in place, and then Cybersecure as far as the end user training to help them. You mentioned the awareness training. So there's a lot of tools that are available at no or low cost if they're working with CompTIA or a member of CompTIA as well.
Right, and the community itself is kind of a tool for just having these conversations and understanding and learning from your peers about what's happening out there. So that's been one of our strongest communities over the past several years, and I expect that it will continue to be, because I don't think security is going anywhere.
It's a very passionate group, which is great because it's an awesome resource to have if you have questions or ideas or just need to validate what's happening too. One other point too is even I think that's the growth of the dark web monitoring services is looking beyond the surface, kind of like that iceberg aspect of there's a lot of things that happen companies aren't even aware of. They need to be more proactive to see what credentials are out on the dark web, what emails, personal information. Is a variety of stuff that's available that MSPs can leverage when going into a new client site to say, by the way, you actually do have vulnerabilities. I know you feel very secure, but let me show you some things that right now that are leaving your company exposed. So how can MSPs and MSSPs leverage information like you have in this report to better service their clients and grow their security practices, Seth?
I think they want to look at the data in this report and begin thinking, to begin with, does that resonate with them? Does it feel like, they feel like they've got a skills gap, or they feel like maybe there's an opportunity for this type of, conversation with their client around what modern security looks like? Another example of kind of looking at the data and really doing a good self-assessment is when we looked at the current challenges with using outside security firms. On the very top, you see the one that you would expect. The costs are too high, and trying to figure out that budget equation. The next one down is the division of labor between internal and external resources, which again I think would be a really great conversation to be had, and trying to figure out who's doing what and what are the rules and responsibilities. But the third one on the list, pretty much at the same level of the division of labor is clients see that their partners have a limited understanding of their IT architecture. And so this is where you can't just walk in and say, I've got a security solution that I'm trying to sell, and here's why the solution is so great. It has to be this understanding of what is your architecture, what are you trying to do with technology, where are you trying to go, where have you added new pieces or components, how are you exploring emerging technology, and then bringing security alongside that conversation. I'm sure there are a lot of MSPs out there that feel like they understand the architecture pretty well, like what their client might have in place, but maybe they don't understand as much where that client is wanting to go, where they're wanting to take that architecture or their overall technology footprint. And again, that's kind of that transition from the tactical side of here's what I know is in place today, and the strategic side of here's where my client is wanting to go tomorrow. We talk a lot, I think, within our communities about an MSP trying to drive that conversation with clients. I wonder how many MSPs are equipped to drive that conversation and maybe get their clients thinking about where they might want to go in the future. And so I think that's an opportunity there. And again, that's just one data point. There's quite a bit of data in the report here. I think that there's the opportunity to look at the data and do a self-assessment and try to figure out how to go forward, whether that's bringing in new skill or whether that's really talking internally about the discussions that you're trying to have with clients.
Makes perfect sense. And I know that you and the research team put a lot of effort into, trying to understand what the end goals are before you do these research reports too. So they can be a really invaluable resource for channel companies. I always recommend CompTIA Research if people are looking at, whether it's security, managed services. There's a host of different things that you cover each year. So good job and keep it up, I guess would be my point on that. But where can our audience find the report? That's a key question.
Yep. So to see the full report, you can go to CompTIA.org. This report has actually been kind of put in front of our registration wall because it's Cybersecurity Month. And so this one is wide open to anyone that wants to access it. If you want just a visual look at things, then we do have a post on SlideShare. So you can go to our SlideShare account and you can see kind of the deck of slides that's out there. And that's kind of a TLDR format. And if you want to hear me and my colleague Carolyn April talking about it, then you could check out our Volley podcast that we record twice a month. And the most recent one was us covering this report and kind of digging into it and some of the findings, a lot of which we've talked about today, but people should check out Volley anyway. So,
and they can find Volley on the CompTIA website as well.
We have a podcast landing page for all of our podcasts, and you can find Volley on iTunes or Stitcher, or probably any other kind of podcast app that you might use.
Very good, and I am a frequent listener. I do recommend it. So you guys do a great job over there, you and Carolyn.
Oh, thank you.
So with that, any final thoughts or suggestions for our group before we go? Time goes so quick when we're doing the podcast. I wish we could do an hour, but then we'd probably lose half our audience. But
yeah, I would just say, echoing, I think, some of what we talked about already today, I think security is going to continue being a topic of great conversation within the IT ecosystem. And especially as we have these emerging technologies coming, whether it's IoT, like IoTSSA focuses on, or artificial intelligence or whatever, there's going to be security implications. And companies certainly have an appetite for bringing in new technology. And we're interested in finding out exactly how much appetite they have for ensuring that they're securing that new technology.
Very good. Well, on behalf of IoTSSA, I'd like to thank Seth Robinson from CompTIA research team for joining us today, and appreciate those of you who took the time to listen in on our conversation. I also encourage you to check out all the great cybersecurity content on the association's website, IoTSSA.com, as well as CompTIA.org, and wish you all to have a phenomenal day. Thanks so much.